So this game that I'm concepting, my my goal for this game concept, this game idea, would be to really flesh it out and write it as a proposal, and that way I could send it off to, maybe I send it off to Hooded Horse, which is a publisher that helps support indie developers with developing their games, in that the hope that they could maybe pair me with an indie dev who'd be willing to try and make this game, because this isn't a giant AAA game. This is really something that would be done well by an indie dev, especially with the different engines that are out there. Yeah, Blizzard Road Trader is a lot of fun. I really enjoy it. It definitely. I haven't had experienced much in the way of bugs. Really, hardly anything. But I know a lot of people have reported them. But I love the story. I love the characters. I'm a Warhammer 40K fan, so it's just a natural fit for me, and so I really enjoy it. But this actually takes a little bit of inspiration from that, in that the game would have an overall world map, like a galaxy map. And actually, before we keep going, we're going to switch into the other screen. Here, let me open up the image first. Okay, I want that, and I want this one. Okay, now we're going to switch screens. That's odd. That's supposed to play in my ears when it does the transition. Did you guys hear the transition sound? Because I didn't hear it. Okay, so yeah, okay, negative on the transition sound. Good to know. Something got borked by OBS again. Oh man, every time. Okay, so stop blowing holes in my shit. Okay. Mic check. Yep, that's still coming through. Okay, that worked on your end? Okay, I didn't hear it on my end. So it's the output to my head. But then on the transition, it didn't output to you guys. Okay, I'm gonna have to troubleshoot that. Okay, so first things first. Obviously, I'm a former Marine, and I love all things Marine. Especially sci-fi. Your boarding operations, your planetary landings, anything to do with Marines going from spaceship to to shore, whether it's on a ship, on a planet, a space station, an asteroid base, all that. Field day. No, not a fan of field day. Nobody likes field day. So the focus of the game would be on sort of space marine combined arms warfare, but on a galactic scale. Hey, socially confused. Good to see you. Hope you're doing well. And the inspiration for the game, not the game mechanics, not the game story itself, but the inspiration for the game mechanics would be, not every ship would be an LHD, but your hero ship is essentially an LHD, and that's where one of the principal game mechanics comes from, in that the game's mechanics, it's the game's DNA would be that primarily, like if you had a mother and a father, it would be Star Wars Empire at War and XCOM. So if you've played both of those, you probably will have an idea of what I'm talking about off the top of my, just immediately. But so I want this guy. XCOM is a really great game, and that reminds me of another image I need to bring here. here before. I'll do it over in this browser and then bring it in. So let's do XCOM 2 base. Base building image. And I want, can you give me the zoomed out version? I want to be able to see the whole thing. I guess that's pretty good, or is that one? I need a high-res image. There we go. This will work. It's not a very high-res image, though. Oh, that's better. Oh, here we go. Open image, new tab, save image as. Here. All right. So we have 80s action movie haircut go. The original, oh man, back in 94. Ooh, boy. Okay. Yeah, XCOM 3 would be a great game. And so the another inspiration, these would be like the DNA, the mom and the dad DNA, but I will gather some more images that really got me on this idea. And the idea for the game came after the idea for the book. And basically, when I came up with the idea for the game, I was like, oh, I could marry this to the story that I've had in my head for years. So, and this is Empires at War, the sort of base game, and you have this sort of galaxy map. And obviously, this is just a chunk of it. It gets a whole lot bigger than this. And it has some 4X elements, but it's also very much a strategy game. But Star Wars Empire at War is one of the only games, and here you can see the mini map for the galaxy map up here. But Star Wars Empire at War is one of the only games that not only had space combat, even though it was like a top-down RTS, it was space combat, but it also had ground-based combat. And I have always wanted a game that married the two like this, but in more of a next-gen format. But I wanted it to not be an RTS where you can just build as many units as you want and, eventually, as long as you have the resources, zerg the whole map. I wanted the game to be, sort of constricted in that you didn't have an unlimited resources and you had to basically use a, what would be the word for it? But basically you would be doing, missions, contracts, jobs in the game at different systems in order to essentially earn reputation to then get those systems to back you and to give you resources, to continue to fuel your efforts. But also there would be limited ability, only a handful of other systems here where you'd have units that you could directly recruit by doing those contracts. So you would start off with your sort of base task force, your hero ship and its escorts, and you'd go around to different parts of the map throughout the campaign, trying to win over these systems to aid you to your cause. But some systems would just have resources that you could use to then upgrade your hero ship, as well. Most of it would be upgrading your hero ship, but also have limited upgrade abilities for your escorts. But then also certain systems would have different static forces, both in terms of space-based forces as well as ground forces that you could recruit if you did the job there, did the contract there to earn their allegiance, and then they would join up with you. And so that would expand the forces that you have going into the later game in order to spread out across the map and essentially control more territory, not control it, but in order to maintain the reputation you've earned. Because these systems, could fall under attack again. There could be other events that play out that if you don't have a force nearby to react to it, you wouldn't be able to defend it, and then you would lose their support. Or they would say, hey, you haven't done enough for us recently, or we've changed our minds. You'd have different avenues for maintaining that support. And the whole goal behind it would be to, via a lot of player agency, to decide which systems you wanted to spend your efforts on in order to win them over, to support you, in order to retake Earth and to retake the Sol system. And would have a roguelite element in it, in that you have a limited amount of time before Earth eventually capitulates. The people of Earth give up hope and give in to their what would become essentially slave masters, their alien slave masters. And if you don't win enough support from the various human colonies to return to the Sol system and liberate Earth, then all hope would be lost. But also, so if you didn't do enough, if you didn't win over enough planets, enough systems, as you're winning over these systems, it helps maintain the hope level for Earth, for the people of Earth, and you're going to make sure it doesn't get too low. So if you're off going and doing your own thing and trying to recruit units for your fleet, your task force, but you're not doing enough missions to win over the support of these human colonies, then the hope level would get too low. Your fleet would get a lot stronger, but your hope level would get too low. And so you have to, as a player, you have to balance keeping your hope up while also tracking down where these wayward units that you can recruit directly and control directly. It's a delicate balance while also maintaining what you've got until the final timeline. Like, here is you have until this the running out of hope is flexible. You're just trying to keep that up until the final battle, and you also have to have enough units recruited and want enough support to win that final battle, because you do have to fight that final battle at the end. But if your task force is too weak and you haven't gained enough allies who then meet you back at the Sol system to support you in that final battle, you'll lose. Game over. Game over, man. Game over. Does that make sense? Am I explaining it? Yeah. So you don't have a base ship, or you have a hero ship, but it can't build units. But what you can do, and next image over. Oh gosh, that's terrible quality. Okay. I need to find let's find a better image for the XCOM 2 base. Oops. Wrong one. Sorry, I didn't have enough time to get all the images I wanted. Come to base building, images. Is there a way to filter it so that I only find high-res images? Because what is this peasant nonsense of these low-res images? Like, oh, who takes such low-resolution screenshots? Why? Open image in new tab. Who are these people that take such low resolution screenshots and then post them? Gross. Sorry, I apologize for the delay. I'm just trying to find a good image so I can share with you guys. Okay, here we go. Open image in new tab and save image. Save. There we go. All right. Okay, so close that image because that's garbage. All right, here we go. Yeah, their Alien Descent is another great one. Obviously, Alien Descent had a lot of inspiration from XCOM. But so basically, you would have your galaxy view, and then you could zoom into the system view. And the system view, you could zoom into a system and see essentially what the fog of war would allow you to see. So if you don't have units in there or in that system or allied units in that system, you would just see what essentially the last time the map was updated would show you. And then, but you would also be able to zoom in on allied units and then units under your direct control, like your base ship. And so you could zoom into the allied units, just like if you're on like an RTS map of a star system, and 2D, and then you can zoom in again onto your base ship, and that would give you'd be able to do the top down, or sort of like almost isometric view of it. But then you could zoom in one more time, and then you could get the layout of your base ship. And the layout of the base ship would let you see what modules you have installed, what space you have left, the organization of it, and then you can zoom in on each one and see, just like in XCOM, you can zoom in on this room and see what's going on in there. Now, so you're able to expand and customize your base ship to suit your needs. If you want to have more hangars for dropships, you could do that, and you have to pick, okay, this is a hangar for your small dropships for your troops. This is for your large dropships, for delivering vehicles, mechs, tanks, APCs, that sort of thing, as well as troop berthings, where your troops end up being. Supplies, because you are going to have to manage your resources as you're traveling around the universe. And so if you don't have enough storage capacity on your giant assault ship, your task force will struggle. You'll run out of supplies. You won't be able to. You have to have a certain amount of different resources to deploy troops, to do repairs. You have to have fuel to get around, all that. And so these, and you'll have different modules that you can build in order to customize your ship to your play style based off what you want to do within the campaign. Yeah, all the fun stuff. So you have the elements of, let's see. Oh, it only lets me open it in. Okay. So you have the elements of XCOM in that you can customize your ship. And you have your hero ship, your base, except for it's mobile. And you have to manage resources and gain supplies in order to do things. And if you run out of supplies, or you overspend, you'll be dead in the water. But these things accrue. So not only will you find supplies as you're doing missions and contracts, but also if you win over the loyalty of a star system, say it's a colony system out on the fringe, and they are beset by pirates, and the planetary governor says, hey, if you can do something about these pirates, we will give you, we will essentially pay a tithe of whatever resource or resources they have in that system, and it'll be essentially a certain amount per tick, as you're going about the galaxy map. And so you don't want to overspend your resources and be going flitting around all over the place and spend too much on upgrades, because you'll run out of fuel, and you have to wait for more fuel to be delivered to you from your allied star systems and such. if you don't have enough supplies, you can't make repairs to your ship or to your base ship or the ships in your task force, because you do have escorts. Um, and so all of these sorts of things will come into play. Yeah, so that's the mom and the dad DNA of it. And now I want to show you some more concept art, and this is really how I got the sort of base idea for this. And I was like, oh my gosh, it would be really cool. Sorry, wrong tabs. I've got two different things of Chrome going up. So it was Halo Wars 3 concept art. All right. I want to save. Oh, do they have these individual images? So save image as. Sorry, I should have had this done beforehand. Okay. Ooh, zoom in too much. Okay, cool. You can see that. All right, so this was a pitch for Halo Wars 3. So I have to admit it, this isn't an original idea. Somebody came up with something like this part, or at least this aspect of it, and I don't know if they intended for it to be like a Galaxy at War with this, but basically Halo Wars 3 was you were going to have your ship like this, your base ship, your hero ship that you could customize, and you'd be able to fill out these modules and zoom in on them. Now, I don't know if you'd be able to customize these modules, because you can see these ones look like here, here, and here, like they're waiting to be installed, or if you'd be able to have the modules and then customize each one individually, like they're already pre-installed. I don't know, but when I saw these images, I was like, oh my gosh, it's XCOM, but in space. And that's what I've always wanted. And to have XCOM in space with space battles and ground battles, like in Empire at War, and more importantly, your ground battles are limited by what you bring with you. So if you go to a system and you scan, there's the enemy faction has landed on this planet and they are enslaving the populace, and the enemy faction is there with a substantial force. If you and your escorts are insufficient to defeat the force in orbit, you're boned. You have to make sure that you have the forces necessary. You might have to come back at a later date, and it might be too late. And so it will behoove you to gain intel, to know when these things are going on, and to know where these resources are. It'll behoove you to listen to the lore, read the little text in the cutscenes and stuff in order to find out this information. But also, if you get into orbit, maybe the enemy left only a token space force in orbit of the planet, but they've got a large landing force. Yeah, a lot of people underestimate the value of the book, and that's how this idea kind of came about. Good to see Axis. Hope you're doing well. But so if you are in the early game and you haven't developed out your base ship enough to carry enough troops and arms to take on this substantial force, your troops could get wiped. But you will have the option, because everything your landings from your base ship will be via drop ship, as well as having drop pods. Yes, got to have drop pods. But the drop pods will be simply for inserting special forces behind enemy lines in order to basically take advantage of certain abilities. And but if you only have 2 platoons of infantry and a couple of APCs, and they've got heavy armor and lots of artillery down there, you're screwed. If you have if you've lost all your fighters and bombers in a previous skirmish, and you don't have any ability to provide air cover, and the enemy has air cover, well, you're going to have a really hard time. So that's where this comes into play, because you won't be able to build units on the surface. You will have the units that you deploy, and the units you can bring in reinforcements if you capture certain parts of the map. You have your initial deployment point, your deployment zone, and you're limited on how many points, essentially, of units that you can deploy to that initial starting location. And if you capture certain objectives, you can bring in reinforcements. But there, things like weather and such will affect your ability to bring in reinforcements or to call in airstrikes or orbital artillery, all of that. So if you don't have the module to provide orbital fire support with your base ship, you don't get to call that in. If you've lost your fighters and your bombers, or they're in repair or something like that, you can't call in airstrikes. If you don't have a heavy vehicle bay with the vehicles on board, you can't bring those down to support your infantry. All of this stuff comes into play. Yeah. Special Forces romance. Yeah. I hope I'm explaining that pretty clearly, but basically, what you have in orbit is what you will be able to bring to the ground. And so you'll have to make a decision of whether you commit to that fight, or how much you commit to that fight. Because if you go in there and you land and you get in over your head, but you're able to take a couple of objectives, okay, well, you've made progress on that mission. Blizzard says, I like the idea of that. I wish they did that a bit better in Helldivers. Which part? Tell me more. Just so I'm understanding, picking up what you're throwing down. But nobody makes a story up. Nobody makes a story about Lance Corporal Schmuckatelli. Yeah. Oh man, I would have to have that be a NPC character, a Lance Corporal Schmuckatelli. But you could go down there and do part of a mission, and you gain some intel. You explore the map a little bit. Maybe you complete a couple of the objectives. The mission isn't over. You can retreat back to an insertion point and extract and come back later when you're more prepared. Having the ability to link to the modules you have installed. Yeah, obviously, with Helldivers, you have to buy the different stratagems, but it's what we do with Helldivers. You upgrade the modules you already have to give you better performance, and it's not so much like you don't even have access to this because it's not installed. It's you have access to this, but it's not as cool yet because you haven't upgraded it. I think that's what you're getting at, and I agree. But yeah, that's the point of upgrading your base ship, and you'd have limited ability to upgrade your escorts, and that wouldn't be like adding in these modules, but it would be more of you're at a shipyard and you can swap out weapons for weapons and components for improved shielding, added armor, better acceleration, more maneuverability, swap out these weapons and stuff like that to sort of tailor those to your play style. Do you want your cruiser escort to be a short range broadside brawler, or do you want it to be more hanging back with your assault ship, and it's more of an artillery ship? It's those sorts of things. Yeah, no, I get you, Blizzrad, and that is, yeah, it's something that I think would add a bit more to the game. I think it would make it more interesting, or to be able to have a mode like that, a progression mode that lets you do something like that. I think that would be kind of interesting. The sort of like ultra hard mode, not just the missions are hard, but you progress your character up here, and now you start off on this next level, with real hard mode, if that makes sense. And here, there's another image. Let's open that up too, because this one's even better looking. Look at that. Isn't that cool concept art? God, that looks great. I just love the look of that. Yeah, new game. But see, I love the idea of having all these different rooms that you can configure your ship to suit your play style. Because the other thing is with the galaxy map, now I wanted it to have a roguelite element in that you had essentially you had a mission timer, a mission clock, in that you have to have this is the stop date of when you and your fleet will return to Sol and with whoever you've gained as allies for the final battle. But you also have the roguelite element of you have to maintain your hope, your reputation. You have to maintain the hope of the people of the Sol system, because it's not just Earth. Mars is colonized, some of the Jupiter moons, blah blah blah. But you have to maintain the hope, so that way it doesn't dip below a certain level before getting to that point. Because the whole point of the game is to rescue Earth, but if the people of Earth have given up already, they're essentially it's a lost cause, if that makes sense. But the other roguelite element that I wanted to sort of incorporate was the galaxy map, the systems and their names would stay the same, but the missions for them would randomize each playthrough. So maybe Alpha Centauri, the governor there needs your assistance in dealing with a natural disaster in this playthrough, and they need because obviously there would be a science module, where you can do research. You have an armory module and such like that. And you have your drop ships and everything. So maybe this natural disaster requires medical support. And you have your doctors go down and land on the planet, and and these things, some of these things would be actual combat missions or other RTS missions, and other ones would just be story-based ones where you're picking different options based off of how you have your ship configured. So you deploy doctors to the surface to help find a cure for a plague. You use your drop ships to evacuate a settlement on an island before a tsunami comes. All these different things that you could do with your ship, not just combat, in order to gain reputation with essentially that star system, or you could even break it down to be individual planets within that star system. Maybe this star system has 3 settled planets, or 2 planets and a giant asteroid belt filled with people mining it. And in order to win over the system, you have to win over all 3 groups. But what would change from playthrough to playthrough is the mission types represented on each planet. So, hey, TV Liquid just rated with a party of 68. Oh my God. Thank you so much for the support. Really appreciate you, buddy. Hope you had a great stream. Good to see you. Thank you everybody for dropping by. This evening, I'm not playing Star Citizen, so surprise. I hope you're not upset by that. But what I'm doing is I'm going over I'm concepting game development, and I'm basically talking about this concept for a game that I'm writing up a proposal for to try and submit to a developer, to a studio, to make the game. And it's also a book that I'd like to write. And we're going to get into the story more in here in just a little bit. And I might not even do Lyrical's gameplay tonight. We might not even get that far, just because I'm having fun with this, and this is my show. But thanks for the raid, TV Liquid. I appreciate you stopping by, bringing all your friends. Hope you guys have been having fun and having a good evening. But yeah, so that's what would be another roguelite element, in that the map itself wouldn't randomize, but the missions in the individual star systems on the planets, and there could even space-based missions. You find these pirates. Hey, you need to track them down in the outer system and destroy the pirate fleet. Or you need to there's a pirate base in in the asteroid belt. You have to find it, land your troops, and oust the pirates, eliminate them. But all these would be randomized, so you wouldn't have the same experience each playthrough. Obviously, the ultimate goal is the same, but how you go about doing it is different. So you could cut, after playing through the first time, you're like, oh, okay, I really enjoyed these aspects of the game, and I want to go more into the science and support elements to do those types of different missions, because you'd have options of what you do to win over a planet, to win over a moon, to win over a space station, to support you. And obviously, the other thing that would be randomized would be where, in what star systems you find the units that you can directly recruit. Because there'd only be a handful across the galaxy map of star systems where there's units that essentially, they're still in the fight, and you go and you rescue them, or you rescue them and they decide to join up with you afterwards, or they are protecting the planet or the star system that they're based out of, and the majority of the forces on the ships or the ground units are from that planet, and they won't leave their home to go defend the rest of the galaxy without you giving assurances that their system is protected. Oh, geez, another raid. Holy crap.
Part of the crew. Part of the ship.
Soul Citizens, right?
Part of the crew.
I see Soul Raid.
Part of the crew.
Oh, geez, Soul Citizens raiding with a party of 157. Oh my god, guys. Thank you so much for the raid. Thank you so much for the support. I'm sorry I'm not doing something more exciting tonight. We're talking about game development, and I'm explaining the concept for a game that I'm writing a proposal for. And I just got started with this, but I'm pitching my idea. And this isn't the 2-minute elevator pitch. This is the 1 to 2 hour long Trio through 11 in-depth pitch. But Soul Citizens, hope you guys had a great stream. I hope you guys had fun. I didn't see what you guys were up to this evening, but I hope it was a good show. I mean, obviously it's Soul Citizens, so of course it was. But oh geez, a whole bunch of follows. I'm sorry,
part of the ship. Part of the crew.
The sound alerts are not playing in my head, so I can't hear them. And I don't remember how to mute them. My OBS, I did an OBS update, and of course, OBS is now giving me all sorts of grief. Things aren't working, and we're just muddling way through it. What's up, Soul Citizens? 4-year anniversary. Oh yeah, I saw your post on Twitter about the 4-year anniversary. 4 years of Soul Citizens. It feels like it's been longer than that. Absolute legends. Game dev of what? Okay, so to recap, basically I have this idea for a game. It's my dream strategy game. Star Citizen is my dream game when it comes to FPS and life in space. Talk to you later, 07. Good to see you. Thanks so much for the raid. Love you guys. I will see you guys around. But basically what I'm doing is I'm giving the pitch for this game that I want to play, that I want to have help get developed. And I'm going to write this proposal, make a big old in-depth proposal with both a prologue towards the story, glossary of terms, a bunch of background for the universe, and then also in-depth writing about the different game mechanics and what it's inspired by, as well as just borrowing some concept art. And I'm debating on whether I want to use some AI art to sort of get my point across. But essentially, the game is if you're using DNA, you've got mommy DNA and daddy DNA, humans, that is. The spiritual it's the spiritual successor if XCOM and Star Wars Empire at War had a baby, if that makes sense. So where did the galaxy map image go? Okay, here we go. So Star Wars Empire at War, old school RTS, been around for a long time. So you have a galaxy map, and you're trying to win over star systems to your cause. And some star systems will support you in terms of resources. So you get a certain amount of resources from them every certain number of ticks, based off what the star system has in it. A handful of these star systems will give you, if you win over their support, the units that are in those star systems will be able to be directly recruited by you. But there is no building of units. You have ability to upgrade your units, but there is no ability of units. So you have to ration your units. Now you can replenish your ground troops. You and your fighters and your bombers and your vehicles and such, but only to a certain extent and only at certain locations, because you're not building up a whole bunch of fleets. You're a expeditionary marine force that is on the run trying to recruit help to retake the Sol system after Sol, not Sol citizens. Obviously, Sol citizens would never surrender, but the Sol system, Earth and such, has fallen to our sworn enemy, and the Expeditionary Marine Force was ordered to retreat by the essentially the commander in chief of humanity, ordered to retreat and to bring back help from the Terran colonies, as well as our alien allies. So that's the other part of it, is not all these systems are human. There are systems that are belong to two different alien factions.
Part of the ship.
Forsaken Loki, thank you so much for the follow, and thank you everybody else who followed
Part of
this
the
evening.
crew. Part of the ship.
So
Part of the crew. Part of the ship.
you can't. I'm on the fence on whether you'd be able to directly recruit some of the alien units, but you would definitely. What would the ultimate goal is that you have to balance which systems you go into and do contracts for, do missions for, to gain their support. And some systems will give you support in terms of supplies, your fuel, your munitions, repair material, whatever special things for doing certain upgrades. And then some of them will have units that you'll be able to directly control and then deploy on the map as you see fit, to try and, because you have to maintain control of these systems, because pirates can come back, other natural disasters can happen, our enemy can return, so you have to maintain control of them. But then some of these systems, you'll be able to win them to support you, and they will have fleets or ground forces in the system that will join you in the final battle back at Earth, back at the Sol system, to retake it. And you won't get control of them until that time. And I'm playing with the idea of not even getting to control them, but they fight alongside you. And so, because they want to maintain their own independence. And that's getting a little bit into the lore for the universe of the state of humanity and humanity's. I don't want to use Space Empire, but I'm blanking on the name for humanity's empire. But yeah, so you have the Starmap, you have all these different places you can go to visit to win over their support towards your cause. But the other major influence, and I just love this concept image. I don't even know what it's from. I've been trying to find out what it's from, but it's super cool. But the other sort of spiritual, the DNA of the game is your hero ship, is this big marine assault carrier, one of the largest ships in the fleet. It's the first of its class, and like in XCOM, you are able to you're able to build new modules in your ship in order to give it additional capabilities. More light hangar space, more heavy hangar space. Light hangars being for fighters and bombers for space superiority, heavy hangars being for drop ships for deploying troops and vehicles. Vehicle bays, troop berthings, more chow hall, because you got to have more chow and more crayons. We got to have a crayon factory. That's what this giant module over here is. You got to have medical support in order to heal your troops, because you can evac your troops in order to preserve them and then heal them over time. So that way. This is XCOM 2. Yeah. So this is like the base. I forget what they called the base ship in XCOM 2, but this is just an example. Yep. But that's the idea of your base ship, is that it's fresh off the line, and it has this sort of base configuration of mission modules, and it's meant to be a modular ship that can be reconfigured for different missions. Say, you have to, the goal was for it to be very versatile, but also to be able to be, sort of min-maxed for fleet support, with strike craft, or landing support with lots of troop berthings and vehicle bays and hangars for drop ships and such. But, your science and engineering bays to do different, upgrades on your vehicles, your aircraft, your troops, to be able to heal your troops in the med bay, to be able to use your scientists and your engineers on different missions to help planets for non-combat things, natural disasters, man-made disasters, plagues, famines, earthquakes, your antimatter reactors about to lose containment, and you need to send your engineers and your scientists down there. All these different options of different missions. Some of them would be RTS top-down combat missions, and some of them would be more text-based, picking options. Okay, you have this is the scenario, and do you send in, do you evacuate the people off the planet and relocate them? Do you use scientists to do this, engineers to do that? You'll have options to achieve success, but you're based off of what you have with what you have on board your ship is what you can take down of the ship. Rippity rip followed your plan. Thank you so much for the follow. So that's the idea of you're not dropping your base module onto the planet and then building your army. You are able to initially deploy a certain number of points of troops to do whatever, and then as you achieve different mission objectives, you are able to bring in more reinforcements, or and if you have fighters and bombers that are in service and armed, you can call in strikes from strafing strikes and dropping bombs and such. If you've got the module for your orbital cannon, you can provide limited orbital fire support. All these different options, but it's up to you to choose how to configure your ship based off your playstyle. Science, all the science. And so you could configure it from playthrough to playthrough based off I like doing these science missions when they come available, so I want to make sure I have extra science modules this time, playing around, versus last time I had more hangar space and cargo area, and I, instead of saving these people from the famine, the disease, or whatever, I evac them and drop them somewhere else. See why they don't make us the science guy. And one of the reasons I got this idea for this game in my head is I saw the concept art for a failed pitch for Halo Wars 3, which was going to have some of these elements in it. And in Halo Wars 3, you would have been able to do a lot of these things in terms of configuring your carrier. And you'd have space combat and you'd have ground combat. And whether you wouldn't be able to deploy, you would have the other part that I thought would be really cool is if you could be locked into space combat and it's a contested battle in space, and you have a time on that ground mission. And so essentially you get into orbit, your ships are in combat, and you deploy your troops and you go do the ground mission. But you have to achieve a certain point within that space combat to be able to deploy troops. And then lots of different options for writing missions for it. Yeah, the space combat in the Halo setting is awfully one-sided, and in this setting, in the lore that I'm writing, it's not so one-sided. We have certain advantages over our enemy, but they also have us beat in numbers. So there's different things, and there's a lot in the campaign. There would be a lot of picking your battles, and okay, we're gonna achieve a limited objective and then retreat and live to fight another day. Versus, I'm going to the only way to win is to completely clear the map. So there could be using stealth dropships to drop special forces and sneak around the map and achieve your objective. You could go in guns blazing, but then risk losing a lot of your troops. A lot of it would be up to you. So that's some of the concept art for the sort of theme of the game. And then the other concept art, where to go, is I wanted to show you some images that I found of what things I liked in terms of inspiration for your base ship, your marine assault carrier. And first, obviously, this should be familiar to many, but this is the UNSC Infinity. This is way bigger than what I'm thinking, but I like the sort of almost mono-hull design, where it's a sort of singular hull. And then, let's see. I also like this one. I thought this is a pretty cool design. The only thing I thought that this hangar here, and obviously you see it over here, looked pretty cool, but I felt like this might be a little bit limiting in terms of modularity and how you place your modules. And I wanted it to be a bit more flexible. Oh, wrong way. This one's smaller. This one is concept art from a game called Astro Empires. And I liked this look, this sort of mono-hull design, but there's a lot of really cool greebling. And I like that, I don't know if these are meant to be weapon mounts, but I like the idea of having a limited number of weapon mounts on the exterior hull that you could modify and customize. But these aren't giant ship-to-ship, massive dreadnought weapon mounts. The point of the Marine Assault Carrier is to deploy troops and to deploy aircraft in support of fleet operations and in support of the troops. And so it would have limited ship-to-ship combat capability, but would be more geared toward defenses. So you'd have a lot of smaller emplacements for providing flak and sort of fleet defense in terms of like intercepting missiles, torpedoes, fighter bombers, and such. And I felt like this sort of layout would give you a lot of room for, okay, you have your initial starting hangar here where you're able to deploy your starting loadout of dropships, fighters, and bombers. And you'd have multiple options for expansion of adding more hangars over here to the front and the back. But do I want to put a hangar here? But if I put a hangar here, it takes up this many blocks, and then I can't put as many science and med bay type things here instead. And I think this is more imagery of it's a sort of isometric view of the same ship. And I like how it's kind of wide versus narrower. I don't know. What do you think about that? Because it almost looks like there's another hangar up here on top. And it does have, I think this is kind of cool because it does, even though the hull itself is fairly symmetric, the placement of different things on the hull gives it a sort of asymmetric feel, and I kind of like that. Another image of the same ship. Here, let's zoom in. And I like the idea of the pass-through hangar. I think that part would definitely be asymmetric in terms of, if you have a hangar for you're deploying your fighters, and who doesn't like them wide? She thick. By the way, this is the AMS NASA, Alliance Marine Ship NASA, named not only after Nassau in the Bahamas, but Nassau is home to one of the first marine landings in United States history, and has also been the name of a U.S. Marine assault ship. But in my lore, this would be named after a colony, an asteroid colony that was liberated by Marines in a fierce battle after it was captured by our enemy. And there's the sort of really cool inside the hangar looking concept that I really liked. Oh wait, why didn't it show? Oh yeah, there's more. But wait, there's more. Here's another one I thought was kind of cool. I think the only thing I might, do a little bit differently is make it so that way when you zoom into this side module mode, you zoom in and you can't see this giant nacelle here. So you could see the modules that would be behind it. The only thing is that's kind of, with this here, it's kind of limiting in terms of where you could place hangar modules. And I'm not sure I want to go with that. I'm not sure if I want to have sort of smaller side thrusters coming off on mounts that allow it to articulate to maneuver, and then have your main thrusters off the back end. Yeah, too U.S. centric. And that was the thing, is I was looking for other historical marine landings and different names, and I wasn't finding anything I liked in terms of things that I could use to name a ship that would make it be more recognizable. And so that's why I wanted it to not be named after a U.S. battle, but be named after a Alliance Marine Corps battle in the future. And have it be, by having it be an asteroid base, an asteroid station. It's basically a port built into a giant asteroid. It makes sense that it would be named Nassau, and have the battle be a giant boarding a massive boarding operation by Marines in order to retake it. I really liked this image, this concept as well. I think I might not taper it as much towards the front, or only taper it at the very end, so it remains large. But I felt like this gave you a lot of surface area to work with in terms of how many different mission modules you'd be able to place in this in these areas. But I also liked it because you had
part of the ship. Part of the crew.
now you have some thruster-looking things here, and I think I might like to see some maybe at different intervals along the ship, both on this top angle and bottom angle, especially if this is sort of, if you're looking at it, it's sort of a, hexagon shape. It's flat on the bottom, flat on the top, angle like that, or maybe even octagonal. But to allow for articulating thrusters for maneuvering, as well as your main thrust coming from the back end. But I like how you have, this looks like a carrier that's more meant for, its weapon placements are more for self-defense and protection. Maybe have one or two more of these smaller ship-to-ship cannons in order to prevent, corvettes and frigates from getting too close. But really, you're not going to be able to do anything with these against, a heavy cruiser, battleship. Those are the ships that this would really need to stay away from. Too many frigates, corvettes would overwhelm this ship without its escorts. But if you had a couple of these, you would be able to get into a little scrape along with your escorts against a small flotilla. But you'd have enough emplacements that you'd be able to provide a very good fleet screen with this ship, especially to protect yourself against fighters, bombers, and boarding, being boarded yourself, or your escorts being boarded. This one is my favorite overall in terms of what you could do with it for mission modules and customization, because you have this big, long, fat midsection through here, and you could be like, okay, I want to max out my hangar space, or okay, I want to do 2 hangars, but I want to be able to carry a lot of supplies, and that way I can have a lot of supplies with me, and then you could have your small modules towards the top, medium modules in the middle, large modules on the bottom. I really like this. You still have this, fat end towards the back. I don't know about these wing things, but I do like the look of it. The only thing I think it's missing are the external emplacements. Yeah, full company Marines. So this is this ship in terms of the game is designed to carry a reinforced battalion of Marines. Hey, Mistral, good to see you. 07, hope you're doing well. Thanks for joining us. But yeah, to be able to, at max capacity, to be able to carry a reinforced battalion of Marines along with their appropriate support, which in turn includes fighters, bombers, dropships, and vehicles. Yeah. But so this is my favorite concept art I've found so far, in terms of the sort of aesthetic I'm going for, both in terms of being able to be utilized for the customization of your ship, but also just the overall sort of ship aesthetic, ship construction aesthetic in this universe for humans. And at least mostly this part here, I don't know how I feel about this wider back end with the wings. I felt like I could do without, but at least the front 3/4 is pretty cool. And I think that's all I have in terms of ships to look at. Okay, cool. So now we're gonna get into the nitty gritty, and you're gonna have to bear with me because we're gonna do some reading. So this segment and me talking about this game dev portion, this is the first one. I'm going to do a couple more, and the follow-on ones I'll basically just summarize everything that we just talked about in terms of the game mechanics. But then the other ones, I have basically 2 pages worth of the prologue, and I feel like the prologue is probably going to go on for about 4 to 6 pages total. Yeah. Blizzard, you're not wrong. It's very much Battlestar-esque, but being able to change your mission modules, because you can change them, but you can't change them on the fly. That's the other thing. Is across the star map are different shipyards at space stations, and you have to go to a shipyard to reconfigure your assault ship, and you have to go to a shipyard to do upgrades to your escorts. Yeah, call Naz and make him read it on Discord. So I'm going to read the prologue, and that way you can get a little bit of an idea of the story and the setting, but I'm not going to give you all of it. We're not going to talk about the rest of it until I finish writing the next couple pages of the prologue. We'll read more of that next time we get together, and then we'll read the sort of end of the prologue. And basically the end of the prologue in the game, you would be sort of the prologue would be whether you'd use cutscenes or just imagery with text or voice acting. You go through bits of the prologue, and towards the end of the prologue is where you'd sort of have the very beginnings of the tutorial. And you would play this sort of scripted part in order to figure out, okay, this is how I move my ship in her escorts. This is how I deploy fighters and bombers. This is how I use these abilities for the ship, your flak screen, and what have you. those sort of base game mechanics, and then I'm not going to spoil that next part, but the sort of back third of the prologue is where you sort of get your introduction to the mechanics of upgrading your ship, your not only your base ship, but you're doing your limited upgrades for your escorts. Because the escorts are all kitted out, but you can swap out weapons, you can swap out, and you can upgrade their armor, upgrade their shields, their thrusters, those sorts of things. But you can't swap out the mission modules. They're not modular ships. They're frigates, destroyers, cruisers, and scout corvettes. So I'm going to read the prologue, and you can tell me what you think. And this is basically the outline that I'm working on. So I'm going to have the prologue. It's going to go on for several pages, really introduces you to the universe. And then I'm also working on the glossary of terms, and that's where you'll sort of get a lot of the lore for the setting and familiarize yourself with how the universe works. And so I'm working on that. And that way, as you're going through the prologue, you can click on the link and it'll take you to the appropriate term in the glossary, and you can read more about it. And so there'll be, the aliens factions will be in here, and you'll be able to go down and read about them. You can read about your ship. You can read about the characters. You can read about technology in this universe, and how I'm sort of concepting that. But that's something that we're going to talk about in the next episode. Is I'm going to ask you guys, and I'm going to put it out both on Twitter and on my YouTube and in my Discord, and I'm going to ask for ideas and feedback on my own ideas about how to implement my sort of vision. What to name it. What sort of fictional technology would it be that achieves this game mechanic to make the game work, if that makes sense. So we'll get more into that in the next episode. So the view from the observation deck of the ATS, Alliance of Terran Systems, Navy shipyard at Ceres was awe-inspiring. Not because it offered spectacular orbital vistas or a front row seat to some visually stunning stellar phenomena, but because of what was being born within the massive gantries extending from the station. Sorry, I need to drink water. Everybody hydrate. Sorry. While most wouldn't find the hulking capital ship that dominated the viewport as striking as the ships of the line, bristling with their weapon emplacements and massive nacelles as they were, to Colonel Anders Andy Nielsen of the Alliance Marines, she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. The AMS Nassau was the first of the Nassau-class assault ships, and the product of nearly 3 decades of hard-learned lessons by humanity in their struggle against the insert species name here. I haven't figured out the name for my antagonist alien species. That's what I'm still working on. And so that's one of the things I'm going to put out to the community. Here's a description of what they're like and how they function, but I need a name. Need a cool name, something that rolls off the tongue but sounds sufficiently menacing. At over 2.5 kilometers long and more than half a kilometer amidships, the only ships in the fleet that outmassed her were the Navy's supercarriers and battleships, and even then, only barely. The Nazaract. Is that... Sorry, pardon me. Is that a play off of Nazareth? Because that's actually not bad. Oh, man. I'm going to tell him, be like, hey, one of the names that was pitched is actually, it sounds kind of like your name. Just coincidence. No, but I like that. That's a pretty cool name. She wasn't sleek or fast or even heavily armed, but what she lacked in those respects, she made up for with what she carried. Marines. Within her heavily armored hull, her highly modular compartments could be configured to carry, deploy, and support everything in the Alliance Marine arsenal that a reinforced battalion could need. The Nassau and her future sister ships were the epitome of force projection for the Alliance. Planetary landings, boarding operations, orbital fire support, and even space superiority and attack via marine fighters and bombers. The only thing the assault ships of the Nassau class couldn't do was stand toe-to-toe against enemy ships of the line unescorted. That's what made her special. "I never thought I'd be standing here," I remarked. "Don't kid yourself, Andy. Your career has been on this trajectory since you made captain," replied Sergeant Major Boone, named after my son, Buck McGregor, the senior enlisted Marine of the newly formed 1st Expeditionary Marine Force, and probably one of the most hardened Marines in all of Alliance space. "You know what I mean. This is different. When I was a captain, this trajectory didn't exist. Sure, I thought I'd command a battalion, maybe even a regiment someday. But what we're doing, what the Marines are doing, this is uncharted territory." Nielsen was referring to the new direction the Marines were going. With the resurgence in recent decades and the necessity of traditionally Marine operations, like planetary landings and boarding operations, the Army and the Navy had begrudgingly admitted their forces were ill prepared to undertake the tasks that the Marines of centuries past had specialized in. Now the Marines were to form their first fleet, with Marine auxiliaries manning their ships in traditionally naval roles, and a Marine in overall command of what was essentially an entire task force of ships. "Yeah, it's new, but we're Marines. We adapt and we win. We always have. That, and we're some of the Marines who helped chart this territory. If you and your company hadn't crippled that dreadnought's lateral thrusters at the Battle of Centauri, she would have torn the third Fleet to shreds. And Major Kotri and I rode those modified cargo pods to the surface. And if Major Kotri and I hadn't rode those modified cargo pods to the surface, the insert species name here would have overrun that Army battalion and secured the defenses protecting New Sydney. We'd have been cut to pieces in orbit trying to retake the colony." "Well, shit, sir. Now I feel really old." Buck sure knew how to get his point across, and he sure as hell wasn't going to let me stew in my own self-doubt. In order to rapidly deploy to colony systems to defend against insert species name here incursions, the Marines had to have a ship capable of carrying their landing forces to systems not connected by established hyperlanes, and then sustain their operations once there. The Marines also needed ships that could deploy the now famous Marine shock pods in the thick of a fleet engagement or onto a contested planet. With heavy shield technology, it took concentrated firepower and deft maneuvering to ultimately disable an enemy warship, and even then, engagements were long and costly. However, coordinated boarding actions by onboard Marine detachments had on several occasions turned pitched battles into lopsided victories for the Alliance and her alien partners in the fight against the insert species name here. And Alliance military leaders were eager to exploit this apparent weakness. "I get what you mean, Buck. It's a lot more to lead an entire task force out on the fringe than just your fellow Marines. At least the brass let us have our pick when it came to the rest of the command. We've got the right team." "That we do. Come on, sir. Grab your trash so we can get on board and underway. We've got a lot of space to cover and way too much shit to do on the way. And if I have to spend another goddamn day on this... another goddamn day on this Navy station, I'm going to have a stroke." Now, with her space trials complete and her base configuration of mission modules installed, the Nassau and some of her escorts were ready to depart the Sol system. Her maiden voyage would first take her to the insert system name here, and the Presidio, the headquarters station of the Alliance Marines, and the place where she would finish outfitting for her mission in the outer colonies. After that, they'd rendezvous with the other ships of the task force out on maneuvers on their way to the Reach, a region at the edge of Alliance space, closest to the empire of the insert species name here. So do these guys only attack water planets? Are you making a joke, Blizzrad? Are you mocking me? So, this sort of sets the tone. And it basically loosely alludes to the way things are done in this universe, both in terms of with the technology that's available, because they are Marines. Blizzrad will be here all week, everybody. So one of the things I'm going to go into more, and it'll be in the glossary and there'll be a link to it, but basically the universe is only partly connected. So if we go back to this image, you'll have basically two types of systems that are connected via the hyperlane system. So essentially, there'll be like jump gates that can be used to transport you from one system to another. And basically, the jump gates do something to the extent of, and I haven't decided on name, jump gate, whatever, hyperlane gate. I don't know. But basically, it's a thing in space that transfers you to the next system, and it's not instantaneous, but it's basically a lot faster than slow boating between systems, and it allows for any ship to transition between systems, small to super capital. And so some systems, the ones that have basically the largest populations, the greatest resource value, the ones that would be a higher priority to establish on this hyperlane system. Think of it like the railroad, the construction of the railroads in the U.S. and the highway system. It was built in order to connect your major cities and major ports, for purposes of infrastructure. So you've got this hyperlane system that connects only some of the planets or some of the systems, and some of the systems can only be reached by essentially ships that have have reactors large enough to power the device that allows them to make this transition. Now, these transitions take a little bit longer. And obviously they require resources, whereas if you go via the hyperlane system, you don't use resources to transition this way, and it goes faster because these are more powerful. Essentially, they're these giant structures in space that have these huge antimatter reactors that power the device. So you're not using the antimatter reactor on your ship and thus antimatter fuel. But you can go to these essentially more fringe systems, or what would be another term for it besides fringe? Almost backwater systems that aren't on the beaten path, but these systems would be essentially easier to do missions in order to win their support. But also because these missions or these systems aren't connected to the hyperlane system, this is where you would most often, you're more likely to find stranded forces from the Alliance military, the Alliance of Terran Systems military, because the only way to get to these systems is via essentially a super capital ship. And so there are private super capital ships, the big super freighters that go back and forth, moving supplies and basically supporting commerce from these smaller colonies, because there's a lot of resources in these colonies, but their population isn't as large. They don't have very really habitable planets, your Earth likes, with big populations. But this is where a lot of the corporations operate in terms of mining and resource gathering, with both their own super freighters as well as freelance super freighters. But if for the military, the only what you can do with your super capital is you're opening up a wormhole or a jump gate or whatever you want to call it, and you and a certain number of ships can go through with you. So with your base ship, you could open up a jump gate and you can take a certain number of escorts with you in that jump. And so you are limited by the number of forces you can bring to these systems. Now, granted, a lot of these systems wouldn't be, you probably wouldn't find as big of an enemy presence there, but you would find it. because a lot of these fringe systems are going to be closer in proximity to the enemy. And so they are easier for the enemy to get to via the same means, because obviously the enemy doesn't have a hyperlane to get to these fringe systems. So they're the first ones to come under attack by the enemy. And the enemy is looking not only for resources, but also for labor. And I'm not going to talk much more about that, but that's going to get into lore about the enemy. And what sort of what their motivation is for attacking humanity. So yeah, a lot of these fringe systems that aren't connected by us, we're going to use this as an illustration for a hyperlane. You could jump to Fondor from this system with your with the NASA and some of your escorts in order to get here, and maybe you would find a stranded frigate or two, or a stranded marine unit, or here that you could recruit, take on board your ship, or you could join your task force. But they're stranded here because there isn't an alliance fleet of it. Couldn't come get them. They were dropped off here to protect this system, but now they're stranded here because they can't get back because they don't have a ship to essentially piggyback with. And so that's what part of what you're looking for is spending your time to go out to these fringe systems to look for units you can recruit directly to take on some of these harder missions in the more settled systems. Let's see. Let's go back to this part. The other aspect of the game is you saw that I have a link, and I haven't written these character bios, but there would be and that was another thing I hinted at right here. At least the brass let us have our pick when it came to the rest of the command staff. Not only would you be able to rescue some essentially additional heroes of different types, in these different systems when you do these missions, but also you get to pick your basic command staff. And so you'd have your basic command staff not only for your ship, your home ship, but also your escorts, as well as the initial command staff for your deployable units, so your squadrons and everything. And so, okay, you've got these 2 fighter squadrons, and you want them to be led by this commander, the bomber squadron, and you pick, out of these 3, and you have a little portrait, and then it tells you about their, some of their characteristics, and then they have a special ability. Yeah. So very, very much a la Empire at War, Star Wars Empire at War, where you have these heroes, and you can play into that. Yeah, Luke Skywalker should be fine. Must be public domain by now. But yeah, so this is the prologue thus far. And when we get together again, I'll have another couple pages written, as well as I'll have filled out more of the glossary of terms. I'm also going to have some of these will be historical events that sort of set the tone and help explain the theme of the game. But yeah, there's going to be a number of these that will, just like in any game where you get you have your index, to source information from. But that's why the character names are there, and you'd also be able to customize your main character, your commander. And of course, we have shock pods. And the best part about the shock pods in this universe is they are used for either dropping to the surface and deploying troops onto the surface, or they're used as boarding pods. And so essentially they are fired into an enemy ship to deploy troops in order to essentially create a breach, like a beachhead on the enemy ship that allows you to then you create a beachhead with these shock pods, and then that gives you a little like green area from which to land troops via your drop ships to if you need to land additional troops. You know how I want to use them, can I? Yes. No, these are the shock pods are for deploying Marines against any target. And that's another aspect of the game I'd really like to see, is be able to do a boarding action. So a enemy ship gets within range of your of your base ship, and if you have the shock pod module installed, you can fire the shock pods at them to board the ship, and that will essentially pause the fleet battle and allow you to do a RTS tactical battle with the Marines that you've deployed on the enemy ship in order to incapacitate certain parts of the ship. Yeah, you want to use them to put captured prisoners in and fire them into the sun or something, or a gas giant, or stuff them with explosives and shoot them back at their friends. But yeah, that's another thing I really want to have, and so few games do, like Nexus the Jupiter incident lets you deploy a boarding shuttle, and it essentially would give you a dice roll and you would tell it to target this module or that module in order to give you an edge in combat. I want it to be a small RTS level, and you have to use those troops in order to I can. If I feel really confident with the troops that I have and my skill, I might go for the power plant. But if I'm not confident, or maybe I only had one boarding module, so I was only able to deploy a squad, maybe I'm just going to try and disable the shields on this facing of the ship, or some of the thrusters to limit its mobility, or take out weapons, a couple of weapons here before essentially retreating and getting back on the drop pods or a boarding craft and retreating back to the base ship. But to give you an edge in that space fight afterwards, they retreat back, you go back to the RTS view, and now this ship has this negative status effects. Nexus was a great concept, and it was a good game for its time. I've played through that so many dang times, but I would love to see Nexus redone with what we have now and much more refined. But it had a lot of really great elements. I loved that game. Oh, so this is the first term that I've sort of fleshed out. And I really like this idea, because the idea of the amalgam shield is basically, so humanity has gotten out of the stars, and it started out very Expanse-like in terms of high-speed combat, basically what you would think it is. But with the development, with the discovery of antimatter, and the being able of antimatter, and developing antimatter reactors, as well as I'll just read it. So the advent of amalgam shield technology forever changed the landscape of space warfare. So initially, all we had was a gravity field based shield system, basically to like a deflector array to keep space dust and debris from hurting your ship, but really not, didn't do anything in terms of defense. And so we've really been relying on armor up until the development of the shield technology. Forever changed the landscape of space warfare. After discovering antimatter, humanity only took 5 years to not only to harness the energy it could produce, but also rapidly distribute it. So before this, we had fusion reactors powering our ships. And, that's a lot of power, but we were limited on how much power we could deploy or create, but also on how well we could deploy it, because we're, relying on basically, energy transfer like we do now with wires. But when we discovered antimatter, and I'll go more into it, but we discovered antimatter, and we were able to develop the antimatter tech, antimatter reactor technology. But we got the, and it gets down here, the plasma conduit technology allowed us to be able to, okay, we've got these great antimatter reactors, and they're good for planets because you can, power, an entire continent with a couple of antimatter reactors, but we can't rapidly distribute that energy around a ship, so they don't make, great use of it for ships other than just powering your jump drive device. But when we meet this other alien species, we get this plasma conduit tech from them, and thus we're able to rapidly distribute the power from the antimatter reactor, not only to weapons and thrusters, but more importantly, to be able to create shields, a legitimate shield defense system, and a extremely robust shield defense system. So, while fusion-powered reactors had all but eliminated mankind's dependence on less finite or powerful methods of energy production in the late in the 21st century, antimatter-powered reactors and plasma conduits gave birth to the ability to not only deploy magnetic shields for safe stellar navigation, but a combination of plasma and magnetic fields that could absorb and dissipate weapon energy regardless of type. So these shields aren't like other game shields where, they stop energy weapons, but they don't stop ballistics. Basically, when I say amalgam, it's the word amalgam means that you have multiple shield types, creating a cohesive shield that stops not only navigational hazards, space dust and debris, but projectiles and energy weapons, and it stops those. It stops all that stuff, and then it dissipates the energy of the impact around the shield in order to protect the ship. And they're crazy powerful because we have this plasma conduit technology as well as these hugely powerful antimatter reactors. And so humanity had no master modes to slow it down. Yeah. So basically, and that was why, if you tie that back to what we talked about with space combat up here, where it takes concentrated firepower and deft maneuvering to ultimately disable an enemy warship. So you have to maneuver enough ships to concentrate their firepower on a particular part of a shield to overload the plasma conduits, bringing energy to that shield, to the shield emitter in that area, to thus take down that that part of the shield, and then start actually hitting the ship. And so all ships basically, can maneuver and rotate in order to protect their shield facings. And so it's very difficult to take down a capital ship. There are these very long, protracted battles. And that's where bombers being able to get within the shield, because the shield, the bombers fly slow enough that they can get close up to the shield and then deliver ordnance almost directly onto the target. They don't fly into the They can fly through the shield, but you can use bombers to deploy ordnance and attack specific hard points. But they have to worry about, obviously, like flak and anti-air, or whatever you call it in space. But this is why the boarding has become a thing again. In this universe, the Marines essentially were dramatically downsized for a long time because there wasn't a use for them, because we had combat that was more physics-based, like we think of how it might be now, high speed and such. But what happened is these shields slowed combat down, because if you were doing these high-speed maneuvers, and really quick passes, and you wouldn't be able to focus enough fire onto a given point on these capital ships for a long enough period to take them down. So you had to slow down. Well, if you had to slow down, everybody had to slow down. And so it slowed down space combat. The other thing it made it so that way you had these giant antimatter reactors all over Alliance space, protecting cities and facilities, because you've got shields that can protect them from orbital bombardment. And so now we've given we've brought back the need to have planetary landings and to land forces on the planet to take down to achieve these objectives, to secure a city or a facility, a colony. It's brought back a type of warfare that basically was lost to humanity for centuries because we just didn't do it because we had, we could do orbital bombardments and space combat was very expanse-like. Same thing for like space stations. So powerful shields for ships, space stations, and even planetary locations advanced stellar warfare in ways never thought possible. But this also forced military minds to make rapid changes to adjust to the new reality. And that's where this comment about the product of nearly 3 decades of hard-learned lessons by humanity and their struggles against the insert species here. We've only had this technology for like the last 3 decades or so. It was developed pretty rapidly, but all of a sudden the military is like, we've got this technology now. We have to change the way we do things and learn how to do boarding operations and planetary landings all over again, because it's been centuries since that was really a thing used by humanity in warfare, and it just wasn't necessary. And so now you've got this this rebirth of the Marines from just being a ship-based defense and almost a police force for the Navy, to bringing the Marines back to what they were in centuries past, and developing new technologies to allow them to do this stuff. They took these cargo pods and modified them, made them pointy in order, and made it so you could use them as drop pods for landing on a planet, and as boarding pods, hence the shock pods for whichever use. So that's the sort of why this works. The two main technologies of why that really are the biggest impact of why the game plays the way it does are the way that you move through space, either via the hyperlane system, not locked in, or via the ship-based jump drives that are only able to be carried on the largest of capital ships, as well as the shield tech. And that's the reason you have more slow, longer, protracted battles in space that allow for boarding, that allow for use of fighters and bombers. So yeah, and the working title, and I'm kind of partial to it, and you'll see why when we get towards the end of the prologue, is called Give Them Hope. And we talked about the aspect of hope and your hope meter earlier on in the episode, but you'll hear more about how that plays into the story later on. So yeah, that is basically the concept for the game that I'm going to be continuing to write and gaining concept imagery for, and working on this proposal to send to a developer to see if I can, pitch it to a studio, an indie dev studio, and be like, hey, I think this would make a great game. And I think it would be a great story, and I think people would like to play it. And I think the idea of it having roguelite elements allows you to have a lot of replayability. Yeah, so the lore will translate into the gameplay, both in terms of the lore for the technology that makes all that work, and how that comes into the game mechanics with the boarding, with the landing, the being able to move around the universe, the resources that are available to you, as well as the lore that surrounds the units and the ships and such. Are you sure they would rather give them hopium or copium? Yeah. But yeah, so I want to have a really good backstory and a good universe to work on. And I'm not going to flesh out the whole universe. I'm just writing up the proposal, and that way I can get it out into someone's hands and be like, this is what I'm thinking. I think this would be a great game. The Star Wars Empire at War has a cult following. People love XCOM. Roguelike games have gotten very popular over the years. And so I think combining those elements with a very, a really, sort of space opera, story, I think could be really popular. And I want to play it, and I know I've got friends that would like to play it. So, just so I have a little timestamp, let's go back to this screen for a second, and I will pull up the tabs for lore equals gameplay.